All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Douglas Show. Joining me are the stars of the best TV not on TV, The Beard and Authentic, or Authentic and the Beard, shall I say. Fellas, how are you today?
Good.
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. Like I was telling you a little bit earlier off stage or backstage, long nights, man, with this content creation game. So I was up definitely late last night.
Authentic, you've been crushing them with these Giants videos lately. It's odd during what I've been doing these content creator type episodes. I got no problem asking because I'm curious. How long does it take to put together one of those videos?
I'd say a good day of just grinding it out. Like you can shoot it in the same day and get it edited in the same day, but it takes a lot of work. Even though they're short, these are like short format videos that I'm working on, like 2 minutes, 20 seconds to kind of fit on the Twitter platform and whatnot. There's a lot of details. I try to make the captions. I try to make it the best viewing and listening experience possible for people. So it does take a little bit longer than most traditional videos. And me and the beard, we both of us are inspired by this dude named Pat Flynn, right? And he's got a saying that's like, put the running shoes by the door. And I'm still trying to figure that out for this type of format. Like normally when we do our shows during the week, it's just hop on, go live, kind of simple like this. And we can have high quality content like that. But with these, I'm still trying to figure out workflow and stuff like that. And using them to kind of practice, my filmmaking skills and my storytelling skills a little bit too.
Who did you say told you that?
Pat Flynn. He's anybody who's a content creator, I'd recommend going to follow Pat Flynn's channel. He went live every day during the pandemic for about 2 years, maybe 3 years straight. I think he went live every day, and he just gives tips on just streaming and lighting and audio and all that stuff. Man, he's probably one of the best content creators out there when it comes to information on that niche.
I rarely have beard envy, and yet here I am. One day, Tim, you will lose that color too. You'll be sitting here looking like me, but for now, it looks fantastic. Yes.
uh, yeah,
I
it'll
remember the
get a
days
nice
when it
little
had that beautiful auburn color. I miss it.
it'll get a
Uh,
nice little trim up before the season goes. So I'm looking nice and pristine for the live shows.
were you out in Tennessee? But for those that don't know, like you buy and sell, that's what you do.
hmm
I know this is not part of what we were thinking about for this show, but I'm fascinated by it. Tell me when you were in Tennessee, how long did you say that it took you to get from one end to the other
So
of that yard sale?
the actual sale that I went to, it's called the 127. So it's the longest yard sale in the world. It actually stretches from Michigan all the way to Alabama. But you obviously can't do the entire stretch. So we generally go to Tennessee. It's a smaller area called Crossville, Tennessee. So I drive through Knoxville and all the big city, but it's in Crossville, Tennessee. So I was down there for 4 or 5 days, and it's just you're just nonstop yard sales all from like sunrise to sunset. So it's a lot of fun, also a lot of work. And the driving can get pretty crazy when you go to those long sales, but it's a lot of fun.
Any tasty nuggets out of there?
Yeah, I mean, I listen. I always come back. This year was a little bit tougher than last year, but I did find authentic a nice Giants hat, and
Yeah,
then
a
I
famous
found.
one too. It's Tupac had one on in this famous picture when he was with Yo Yo, and I haven't seen
Okay.
that particular type of snapback in a while. So as soon as he showed me the picture, I was like, "Bro, I need that right now." What he didn't
Yes.
tell me is he grabbed all the Giants hats. So when I went to his house the other day, I was like, "Bro, I need all that."
So I grabbed a bunch. I shop for everything. So I will tell you the one thing I got into that was random that I've kind of been deep diving, pun intended. I'm hooked on, pun intended, is vintage fishing lures. So I was, and there's a lot of that stuff down there. So got into a lot of that, but a lot of antique stuff, vintage stuff, from clothing to hard goods. So yeah, it's a interesting trade, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, you know. So I get to make content about football, and I get to go picking and sell antiques and stuff like that. So I'm pretty fortunate and grateful every day.
How do you do what kind of research is involved in figuring out which lures are valuable?
So I randomly just stumbled across some cleaning out my godmother's storage unit, and so I was like, anything I ever get for free, I always look and see, like, can I sell it? And then I started just stumbling, like going down this rabbit hole, and a lot of the older ones, the wood ones, with glass eyes on the fish, like some of those things can be worth like $500 to $1,000 for one fishing lure. So
Really?
uh, it's a lot.
Authentic, how did you end up being a Giants fan? You're from the DMV, right?
So one of my best homies, Patrick, his family is up from Patterson, New Jersey. They were all Giants fans when they came down, and the Giants kind of happened to be good. You know, late '80s, early '90s. My brother's a Cowboys fan. He was inspired by one of my uncles, and they were winning a lot of games. So that rivalry kind of inspired me a little bit to be a Giants fan. And I'm always like a against the grain type of person. I don't know if you're familiar with the rapper Big L. I'm sure you are familiar with Big L. But Big L had a line where he was like, "I'm from New York, but never was a fan of the Knicks," and it's kind of like that for me. It's like I'm from DC, but never was a fan of the Skins. I don't hate on the Skins. I'm not one of those people that's like, "Oh man, we playing the Skins this week. It's the craziest rivalry," or wishing that they lose every game and whatnot. But it's been nice to kind of focus on y'all team. But I've been a Giants fan since I'd say probably about like '89, something like that, and a serious Giants fan after the two Super Bowl wins. I mean, 2006, 2007, it's like almost a miracle for Giants fans. You know, a season from the Patriots where they go undefeated and whatnot. And we end up going to the Super Bowl, and as a wild card, we get there. And I'll never forget that. The beer was with me at the party. We were watching the Super Bowl game at our homie Big Hurt's crib. And it literally was like a miracle for me. So from that point on, I've really started watching football a lot more. When I was younger, like middle school, high school, I was more focused on playing ball. So I wasn't as in tune to football as much. I would watch as a casual and whatnot, but I wasn't digging into numbers and doing all that. But and then the second Super Bowl is just like, are you kidding me? It's like, yo, God is being too good to us. The football gods are being way too good to us. We beat the Patriots again, and now you know Eli Manning and Giants and all the Giants fans across the country. We kind of had that one up, to go to the football graves with. You know what I'm saying? With two big Super Bowl wins over the GOAT.
Is it good enough to get him in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I think it's a guarantee. I think he's a lock. I don't know about first ballot, but when you look at some of the playoff numbers from Eli Manning, I know during the regular season some people will argue that his numbers were, a bit average, a bit pedestrian. His career record was right at 500 when he ended his career. But I mean, that clutch gene that Eli had when it came playoff time still has the best playoff run in NFL history as far as yardage goes and his statistics. So I mean, I think that should be able to get him in. And when you look at what Tom Brady did, you got to look at how Eli Manning was able to dethrone him when a lot of things around him weren't going that well. You look at the first run and how we beat the 49ers in the playoffs that year. Eli was getting killed. He has a famous picture with his chin strap hanging over his nose, and he was the core of that team. And then you look at the 2011 run where we were dead last in rushing that year, 89 yards a game. Our defense didn't really get click until the end of the year. It was really Eli Manning, Victor Cruz, Hakeem Nicks. So I definitely think Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer for sure. If somebody wanted to dispute, first ballot, I think that would be cool. But I think he's done enough to get himself in there and get his
I think
jacket.
he's a first ballot. I think he's a first ballot. I think one of the most impressive things too is during that span of football to play every single game until the actual benching,
Yeah.
which was ridiculous. To me, that's something that I think is overlooked a lot of times when you're looking at Hall of Famers. Because playing quarterback during that time and even before then, obviously, is completely different than playing quarterback right now. So I even though like it wasn't that long ago, it's still very different. So to be able to play that many games and that many games in a row, I think this last class of Hall of Fame inductees, I think they missed a combined like under 10 games combined for all of them
It's
who got
wild.
yeah. It's so like it just kind of goes to show you that it obviously plays in the minds of voters and stuff like that. But I think the general public kind of forgets that aspect of playing the game sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is wild because they've made the rules to make it safer. I mean, they constantly do that. And yet last year they set a record NFL wise for the amount of quarterbacks that started in an NFL
Mm.
game. So like I'm sure they've got numbers that show you the opposite is true, but to your point, Beard, it's odd because it doesn't feel like those old gunslingers ever miss games. And maybe that's just because they're running more now.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. They're definitely doing a lot more running, and the speed of the defensive linemen now is just it's on a totally different
Yes.
level. And when you look at why Eli Manning was benched for Geno Smith in 2017, that was Ben McAdoo. I don't fault him for that because the game was shifting, and there was rumors that year that came out to be factual that we were trying to go out there and get Patrick Mahomes. That's what Ben McAdoo wanted to do the following season. And that was the whole like testing Geno Smith and all that. When you look at where Geno Smith is today, in my eyes, he's the most accurate quarterback in the NFL right now. And the completion percentage kind of shows for it. So it's not like he was just some bum. And I think Eli was running out of gas a little bit. And the Giants failed to put the offensive line around him. I think this reigns true till today. If you're going to have that style of quarterback, and I think Joe Burrow's kind of dealing with some of this over in Cincinnati right now, because Joe Burrow's probably one of the quarterbacks who is not as mobile that is excelling at a high level right now. And if they don't find a way to protect him, they're going to run into those same problems because the game has shifted. These edge rushers are extremely fast. You got guys like Dexter Lawrence. Y'all know about interior defensive line over there in Washington or over here in Washington. These guys are getting after the quarterback extremely fast. And when they get there, it's not that they're just like some more leaner bodies getting to the quarterback. These guys are getting bigger, stronger, faster. So when they fall on these quarterbacks, you're going to see more injuries. And I think it's detrimental that you have a quarterback these days that can at least be able to buy time and scramble and be able to make plays with his legs because the game has just shifted to that kind of a style of quarterback.
And it's why the linebacker position is slowly being phased out, or at least changed. Right, the idea of three Ray Lewises on the field, it's not happening anymore. Part of that is because you've got to get guys that can keep up. The part of that is that the running backs get smaller and shiftier every year, so trying to keep track of them, and the tight ends. And so it's not just a defensive thing. Like, they're getting faster all over the field, and that's because these guys stay working at it. Right, I mean, think about what they were doing just 20 years ago in the offseason to what they're doing now. It's incredible. Before we switch off of Eli Manning, I'm curious, if Eli doesn't get the 2 Super Bowls, is he still a
I
Hall
mean,
of
I
Famer?
don't think so. I don't think so. The
Right.
Super Bowls, it'd be there are
It's
more.
all right. Super Bowls can't keep you from getting in, like, say, Dan Marino, but I think they definitely can get you in there if that's what we're talking about, right?
100%. Because when you look at Dan Marino, he's a guy who was top 3, top 2 probably throughout the prime of his career. The knock on Eli Manning is that throughout his career, most people will say he was never really a top 5 quarterback outside of 2011 statistically. So I do think you need the rings when you're that style of player. A guy like, Dan Marino, or even if a guy like John Elway didn't get the rings, they still played at the highest level of the game throughout most of their career. And I think that's the biggest knock on Eli Manning. But when you go and get 2 Super Bowl MVPs, you go out there, put your team on your back. I mean, he was literally the reason why we got in those Super Bowls. You look at the coldest day in Green Bay, Eli Manning, he goes out there and takes care of business. And those runs weren't easy. A lot of those teams had beat us in the regular season in both of those Super Bowls, and Eli and the Giants ended up, taking them down in the playoffs, and the rest is history. So I'm happy to be a Giants fan because, and this is no shade towards Washington fans at all, but like, look how long it's been since you guys have been to a Super Bowl, made a lengthy run right now. It's been since we were kids. So I know how tough that can be, and you're waiting on that Super Bowl as a fan, or you're waiting on that run as a fan. And I just think we're super fortunate as Giants fans to be able to get 2 of those runs. But now it's like the football guys kind of punished us because before last year, we had 5 years of the worst football in the whole entire league.
It's wild when you go back and look at that Phillip Rivers Eli Manning trade. Maybe never a more even trade, right? Like, other than the Super Bowls, again, that's if Phillip Rivers doesn't get in, right, it's because he doesn't have any Super Bowls to the point
Good point.
of
Good point.
how Super Bowls matter. I think that's fairly interesting there.
And Big Ben in that
Uh,
same draft class, and he's got 2 as well. So,
that's right.
yep.
Beard, how does it feel with the new owner in town? It's pretty exciting, right?
Yeah, I mean it for me. I don't know. Is it exciting? Yes, I'm more excited about the potential of the product on the field.
Sure.
I think that the most exciting part about the new ownership is being able to hopefully fan base as a whole to be able to focus more on what's going on the field, because that's what's been the big issue for so long is nobody wants to talk about Washington as a football team in national media, or because they're always so focused on what's happening outside of the football team itself, and as an organization, and Snyder, and all the things that have been going on. So I think there's definitely a lot of that aspect of things just being gone that can bring excitement to what's happening here. But yeah, I think the future is bright. I think it's almost like anybody could have bought the team, really, and I think people would
Yeah,
have been excited at this
sure.
point. So it's I think it's going to take a little bit of time. Obviously, probably I'd say 2 to 3 years before you kind of actually get like 100% vibe and feeling of what this ownership group is, planning to do, what their goals are as a group with this organization. I mean, there's a lot of things still up in the air. I think obviously the biggest thing for me outside of football that this ownership group is probably going to have to focus on is going to be the new stadium, whether they work out a deal to redo FedEx Field, or my hopes come back home to RFK. This I literally, I'm like right in between the two stadiums. So like it
Okay.
doesn't really, I'm literally 10, 15 minutes from FedEx and I'm 10, 15 minutes from RFK. So for me personally, it doesn't really matter location wise as far as, the travel. But I think if you start bringing the stadium to Virginia or, further out in Maryland, I think it alienates the part of the fan base that I think has already been alienated enough to this point with the previous ownership. So I think that the goal of this new ownership is going to have to be to, bring back the old fan base, work on the stadium, and then obviously just keep their nose clean as best as possible. I think that'll be a big help. But for me, I'm most excited about Eric Bieniemy. I think that move, and I've been preaching it since it's happened, and you'll probably hear me talk about it to nauseum throughout the season. But to me, I think it's one of the biggest moves in the game of football this offseason. It's crazy too because Authentic sent me something maybe an hour or so ago about the pace of play of teams in the NFL and their
Warren Sharp
run
put
rate.
out the
Yeah,
article today. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, love
And
Warren
so
Sharp, man.
I've been clamoring for so many years about in recent history, especially under Scott Turner, about the pace of play. It always seemed like everything was so slow. I didn't realize it was that bad, but yeah. And then to see where the Chiefs were, and obviously you don't want to take too much comparison of Chiefs because you have to remember that yes, Eric Bieniemy is coming from the Chiefs, but a lot of that is also Andy Reid. So the hope and the potential of Eric Bieniemy bringing the philosophy from the Chiefs here is very exciting to me, and I think that's what I'm most excited about from this massive change of culture that is continuing to take place and more so has, happened in this offseason in specific.
They didn't score 19 points a game last year. They did not average 19 points a game last year. The league averages right around 23. So if Eric Bieniemy gets them anywhere close to 23, then you should be able to get an extra win or two from the 8 that they got last year. I think it's incredible to think in today's game. The other thing I like about Eric Bieniemy is that early in preseason, it looks like they're playing a lot of 11 personnel.
Love
I
it.
think the philosophy Bieniemy's bringing, the scheme necessarily, maybe not so much because, hello, they got 3 of the better wide receivers in the league. I'd argue maybe one of the better threesomes in the league. So why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't you want all 3 of those guys out on the field at one time? There was this feeling in Commander Land that they were going to run those 2 tight ends out, and it was going to be Logan Thomas's best year ever, which is only 600 yards, by the way, for those that think he's a perennial Pro Bowler. But I think it's good. I don't think you'll see the same tight end usage, lots of wide receiver usage. The interesting thing here is if they have a really good year, the conundrum is then what do you do with Ron Rivera, right? And this is the problem. I had a conversation with Mark Bullock about this a couple of years ago about why the benefits of having an offensive head coach as your head coach. Because so here's the thing with Ron, right? Say they decide, okay, they had a good year, but we like Ron. Ron's the backbone of this thing that built it. We'll bring in somebody with a similar offense so that we're not switching offenses on how. But that's what happens. If you have a good team, then you're constantly bringing in a new offensive coordinator because that guy's going to get a new job. Whereas if Eric Bieniemy is the head coach and you like the offense stays the same and he's got to replace the head coach. So I think if they have a good year, it'll be fascinating to see what Harris decides to do with him.
I think it's already, in my opinion, I think the plan is already set in place. I think Ron Rivera made this hire of Eric Bieniemy under the impression that he's probably going to step away from the head coaching job no matter what happens this season, and things get turned over to Eric Bieniemy, and I think that's the plan the whole way. I don't even.
And
think...
I hear this a lot, but why would Ron Rivera, after living on the struggle bus for 3 years and getting fired from Carolina, start winning football games and say, you know what, take this thing I built for 4 years, EB, and run with it because I'm just that nice. I don't buy that.
He
don't
might
buy it either.
maybe he decides he wants to he could still stay with the franchise in a front office capacity, but I just everything that has happened in his life over the past few years too. I think that, outside of football, I think that's something that we kind of have to weigh in on. I think a lot of his own personal life, along with everything that's happened with the organization over the last few years, has worn on him. I mean, you wouldn't be human if all the things that happened didn't, weigh on you on a personal level. And maybe it doesn't happen this year. Maybe it happens in 2 years. But I think that the plan is in place, in my opinion. And maybe I'm being, hopeful or naive, but I think that the plan is in place that no matter what happens, whether good or bad, within after this season or next season, that the transformation from Rivera to Bieniemy is inevitable.
You know, I'll speak on that a little bit too because Eric Bieniemy is not like I can speak on this as a Giants fan. We got Mike Kafka from Kansas City, right? And nobody really was hearing about Mike Kafka as a quarterback coach over there until he came over to New York and started to have some success with how he was running this offense with Daniel Jones and very limited weapons, right? But Eric Bieniemy has been a candidate for head coaching jobs for like the past 2 to 4 seasons at bare minimum. So when it comes to Ron Rivera, I just think that if the plan was that, he would have stepped away this year. This is the perfect transition year to step away. They're going to have a new stadium. They got new ownership, and Eric Bieniemy is definitely a qualified candidate for it for sure. So I don't think it will be a plan to like. It's not like Ron Rivera's Bill Belichick, right? He really just had success through Cam Newton in Carolina, and outside of that, there hasn't been a major run for Ron Rivera here. In Washington, you've seen 3 seasons of botched quarterback decision making. I feel like from the head coach, starting all the way back to when you guys had Kyle Allen to Ryan Fitzpatrick to even last year when you brought in Carson Wentz, which I didn't think was a mistake because Carson was coming off a good year in Indy. But when you see him get hurt in, I believe it was week 6 against Chicago, and then Taylor Heineke comes in and he starts cooking up the meal, and then you completely just pull his legs out from underneath of him, to me, that's botching it again because I was looking at the Washington and Giants matchups last season like, man, Washington's got the one leg up on us right now, and all they got to do is win this first matchup, and they're going to be a playoff team solidified, and the Giants are going to be clawing to try to get in. But instead, you get a botched quarterback position a couple weeks later, and Washington kind of tailed off towards the end of the year, especially if you remove the win from Sam Howell against the Dallas Cowboys in the last week of the season. If y'all expectedly would have lost that game, it would have looked a lot worse. So for me, with Ron Rivera, I think he's got a lot more to prove. I think it's actually a prove-it year for him. You got to go out there and show that, hey, you can relinquish some of this decision-making on somebody who's more of an offensive mind like Eric Bieniemy, and you kind of got to act like a Tom Coughlin, as a Giants fan, what I would say, and kind of, just oversee everything and umbrella everything that's happening in Washington and make sure it's going well.
And I think that is what's happening. Like on the website, he used to have the VP of football ops title. That's not on there anymore. Like it's just head coach. He obviously, what Eric Bieniemy didn't get in Kansas City was the assistant head coach title, which I think is helpful. He's obviously given him more responsibilities. So I definitely think he is just being the overseer of things. And I think the plan is, as I understand it, that they'll give Bieniemy more in-game decision-making because to me, that's his biggest flaw. Like the pushback on the quarterback thing is he tried every year, right? Like they were in on Stafford. He didn't want to come here. There's nothing you can do about it. They were in on Russell Wilson. That looks like maybe he got lucky there, but still they were trying. Fitzpatrick, people were pumped about that. And not just in the local media, but nationally, right? Like people were pumped nationally that, oh, this is the piece that they needed coming off a playoff year to kind of move them along. He got hurt, never played again, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, and to your point, they tried again with the best option. When they brought in Wentz, there was nobody else that year, right?
And,
so it was
and
like
they went with the rookie in the
still
first
went out and
round
tried
with
that.
Haskins as well. So, you
That-
guys
that's
have
what
tried every way.
they have tried every way. So, like, and we'll see. Whether if Howell is Howell the guy that was going to go in the first round 3 years ago, we'll see. Is he a 5th rounder? Hey, as long as he's somewhere in the middle there, right? If we could get like a 3rd rounder that turns into a decent starter, that's fine by me. I'm okay with that. I think it's interesting as we kind of switch gears a little bit. Maybe 3 years ago, maybe just 2 years ago, before the coaching change in New York, which, by the way, if you wonder how important coaching is, I mean, look no further than the Giants, right, who basically had the same roster last year and just totally looked like a different team.
Yeah.
But it maybe was the worst division in football 3 years ago. I think you could argue it's the 2nd best division outside of the AFC West, maybe the AFC North or East. are in that conversation. But to me, this is one of the stronger divisions in football. I'm curious how authentic am I crazy?
No, I don't think so. The only thing that I would say about last season that you could look at and question on the NFC East where they rank as far as the other divisions is we all benefited from having an easier schedule. A lot of those games last year on the schedule were just, I looked at the schedule and I remember telling all my homies, like, I just don't see how we're not going to win at least 7 or 8 games. And we were coming off a terrible season the year before, fired coach, fired GM, and all that. And I think this year's going to be a great test. Going up against the AFC East this year, the Giants got tough tests early on. Like weeks 3 through 6 are going to be excruciating for us. And our first couple of games are not, a cupcake either. We got Dallas week 1, so we got to go out and win that game. But seeing teams like Buffalo, the Jets now with Aaron Rodgers on the schedule, we got to play Seattle this year. There's just so many better teams on the schedule this year. So I think this year's really going to be it's going to be a test for everybody in the division to see where we really stand. I mean, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles last year, the only team that beat them when they had Jalen Hurts on the field was y'all. So outside of that, they went undefeated with Jalen Hurts, and they lost a couple games with Gardner Minshew there. Dallas as well, dealing with Dak Prescott leading the league in interceptions. They were still a 12-win team. That's back-to-back seasons for Dallas now with 12 wins. So I think, this year's going to be the major test for us to see where we really stand. I grew up in the 90s, so the NFC East was a powerhouse in the 90s for sure, and I'm looking to get back to that. But I think that, if all these teams kind of regressed a little bit as far as the win column, it would not surprise me this year. I don't expect it to increase. I don't see Philly winning more than 13, 14 games. Dallas, same thing. And the Giants, we put up 9.5 wins last year. I think we can be somewhere around there, but if it landed on 7 or 8, it would not surprise me at all.
And yet I had Aaron Schatz on, who puts the big book together before the season from FTA, I think, sponsored this year. And they've got Dallas with the most wins in the whole league.
Listen, it wouldn't surprise me, man.
It's crazy.
The Cowboys right now made some upgrades. The question marks are on the offensive line for sure. But what they did with bringing in Brandon Cooks, I love it. Stephon Gilmore, you put another corner like that opposite side of Trayvon Diggs, that secondary should be really good. That young kid over there, Nashawn Wright, is on to come up as well. I'd look to see him on the field a little bit more this year, that he's healthy. Cowboys can do it. I think they can do it. They have the probably the most experienced quarterback in the division. Maybe a lot of people think he's kind of flattening out here a little bit. I'm not too sure. We're going to figure that out this year. And maybe there'll be a turn of the guard here. Maybe Jalen Hurts or one of our quarterbacks can jump up and be the top guy in the division. But there's something about Dallas, man. They always win games. When it comes to the playoffs, different story.
It's tough. Dallas is always tough for me because when they're really good, you see that and you're like, and that's what I think a lot of people see, especially in season. They see how good they can be. But then they come out and they had a couple of those really funny losses last season where it's kind of like, I mean, I predicted them on the show, but they're head scratchers to everybody else, some of those losses. So it's interesting to see if Dallas can find some sort of consistency, and I've always been a big Tony Pollard fan. I think it's going to be interesting to see that transition, even though he did carry most of the load last season, it still was a lot of Zeke Elliott. So it'll be interesting to see how they make that transition as far as Tony Pollard being the number one guy, because who else is running the ball over there? I mean, they drafted Deuce Vaughn, who looks good in preseason, but I mean, he's more of a third down back, I guess you would say. I'm not going to put that
label on him just yet.
That's why I almost threw the quotation marks with it. But it's just going to be interesting to see how they're going to utilize him, how that offense is going to be, how consistent Dak is going to be. Is Dak going to be? Because Dak is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, Dak can be he has the potential to be a top 5 to top 10 at least quarterback in the National Football League.
I think he's top 10 right now. I think he is the 10th quarterback right now.
And so for me, it's like, which Dak are you going to get? That's going to be the question mark. I mean, everybody always wants to question Mike McCarthy as a coach, but they have the pieces there. You mentioned, I mean, we're both
and rightfully
very high.
So. He had Aaron Rodgers for his career and got a Super Bowl.
Yeah, so we're both very high on Brandon Cooks, and then Micah Parsons is Micah Parsons. You can't talk about the Dallas Cowboys without mentioning Micah Parsons. So it's going to be interesting. I think each team got better, obviously, in this division. I mean, the Eagles, I don't even know how they are allowed to do it. They just keep adding people, it feels like, and then the Giants with Darren Waller, to me, is the number one offseason acquisition, maybe outside of Aaron Rodgers in the entire NFL. And then obviously Washington with getting Eric Bieniemy, I believe, our best quarterback in the Ron Rivera era in Sam Howell. So everybody got a little bit better. I mean, we're going to have a healthy Chase Young. So it's going to be interesting because, yeah, we're getting better, but that schedule is absolutely brutal for our division this year.
You know, all that said, Cowboys went through all that turmoil, 2 quarterbacks during the year and all that, and still only lost 5 games.
Yeah.
So if they can just have stability as far as, you know, injuries go, I'd look for them to be at the top of the division. I think, don't forget last year when they played y'all, and I know y'all don't forget this, they were playing for a #1 bid in the NFC. It had
Yeah, I tell
gone
people
their
that all
way.
the time. That notion that they weren't playing for anything in that last game is ridiculous.
Yeah.
They put
It's
all their
completely
starters out
ridiculous.
there
And
and were playing.
that
Yeah.
surprised the hell out of me that they lost that game too, because they had the better roster, they had more momentum. They're playing against a team that had been mathematically eliminated. It was pretty much a playoff game for Dallas at that point. You got to go out there and handle business and hope that the Philadelphia Eagles would lose. But also, the other thing I will add is that the matchups between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cowboys last year were not fair, to be honest. You know, the first matchup, you had Cooper Rush playing against them. In the second matchup, you didn't have Jalen Hurts for the Philadelphia Eagles. So we really never got to see that head-to-head matchup between Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts last year to see who was really going to be the juggernaut of this division. So I am high on the Dallas Cowboys. I think they're going to be right around the same wins as the Philadelphia Eagles. But like I said, it's not going to surprise. When I do my predictions, I'm probably going to pick the Dallas Cowboys to win the division, to be honest.
Ooh.
You mentioned the Eagles and all the players they brought in. Obviously, I'm a lifelong Bulldogs fan, so it makes me sad. And the Giants have gotten some of my favorite Bulldogs, and that makes me sad. I was surprised when I saw the Giants fan base after year one with Andrew Thomas, and they were a little disappointed. And I thought to myself, just wait, because the kid is just so good. And once he gets it, he's going to be like that. I was glad to see that they paid him. Guy that's not getting paid authentic is the running back, Saquon Barkley. I'm not sure what you do with it. When I had El Jefe on last week to do the Giants preview, he had mentioned that last year they had given him or offered him a contract that would have made him, I think, the highest paid running back. It was either 11 or 13, if I recall right, per year. Turned that down. Now he's on the franchise tag for less money. What will they do with him? What is he worth? Does he catch the ball enough to be worth a McCaffrey-like contract? Because I guess that's what we're all doing now, right? It's like how can you like get to a point where you can feel good about paying a guy that?
Yeah, I
Because you'll
think,
have
you
to
know,
do
with
more.
Saquon, you have to look at the running back market and the value of running backs right now. And I know a lot of people are looking at that CMC contract and they're like, they don't want to pay that for running backs at the moment, you know. And the deal that was presented to Saquon Barkley at the bye last year was a little bit less. I believe they offered him 13 to 14, which would be just like 2 or 3 million under what McCaffrey is getting. But at the time, we're talking about the Giants are sitting at 7-2, all on the back of Saquon Barkley at that point. I mean, Dale Jones definitely doing his thing. Let me not take away his credit. The Giants fans will definitely come for me. You know, he's doing his thing off the boots and he's running as well. But the identity of the offense through the first 9 games last year was Saquon Barkley. So they offer you a deal that you feel like, hey, I'm the #1 running back in the NFL right now. I'm not mad at him for turning it down. A lot of people in the Giants nation were saying, you know, he's being greedy and all this extra stuff. I just think it's just a conundrum for the NFL and for running backs. And you got to look back at the 2011 CBA. That's why we're here. Veteran players were complaining about rookies coming in, making all this money. So they decided to switch things up. And the agreement came to, you know, hey, this is where we're at right now. But I think they got to find a way to give running backs more guaranteed money. I saw Rich Eisen talking about this a little bit more too. Maybe they make it more incentive-based the first couple years in the NFL for running backs, because we know the lifespan of a running back is a lot, you know, shorter than the rest of the positions. But I was looking at the other positions too, and wide receiver seems to be the same way. You get guys at 28, 29 years old, they're completely falling off a cliff. And to me, it makes no sense. And big shout out to him. He just retired. Corey Davis got a deal just 2 seasons ago from the Jets for $30 million, and he was making more money than Saquon Barkley was going to make on the franchise tag. Now, the Giants did, after the franchise tag deadline on the 17th of July, switch it up, and they got Saquon a 1-year deal. And this was new information to me, because I thought once the franchise tag was done, you couldn't sign any deals. But you can sign a 1-year deal. So they signed him to a 1-year deal that pretty much is equivalent to the exact amount of the franchise tag, but they gave him some incentives in the contract that could make him earn up to an extra $1 or $2 million. But the numbers are pretty high. So, and as far as the future goes, you know, I look at Joe Schoen, who's doing a fantastic job right now, bringing in players and dealing with limited cap space from the Dave Gettleman era, where all these contracts were just pushed back. When you look at Leonard Williams, when you look at Kenny Galladay, these were awful contracts. James Bradbury, who still should be a Giant till this day, but the contract kind of ruined that, and Joe Schoen had to part ways with him. I think Joe Shane is doing a good job, but when you look at what he did in Buffalo, there's been some very similar parallels here. He had Tyrod Taylor who took him to the playoffs. He decided to part ways with Tyrod Taylor. Daniel Jones, though, he decided, hey, we're going to give Daniel Jones the money here. But if you look at what happened with Shady McCoy in Buffalo, they just allowed him to walk and go, as a free agent and do what he does. So I don't think that Brian Dable and the philosophy that he's bringing to the New York Giants is necessarily predicated on the running back if everything is going ideally the way he wants to. He comes in here the first year, they're strapped for weapons. We're pulling guys off the streets to try to come out here and play wide receiver. You got to utilize your best weapon. So I think that's where Saquon Barkley's, fifth-year extension or not extension, what am I saying, option. His fifth-year option came into play. And also now this franchise tag / 1 year deal. But it's not going to surprise me if Saquon Barkley is not a Giant next year or the following year after that. They have the option to maybe tag him again next year. And I think that's probably going to be it for Saquon if they can't find a deal for him.
What quickly, because I guess I didn't know that, and I'm curious why. What is the benefit of not tagging him and giving him the 1 year deal? It doesn't save them the franchise tag, right? There's another reason for it.
It doesn't save him the franchise tag. And I think the only reason why they did it was to get Saquon to camp. Interviews came out with Saquon Barkley on that Money Matters podcast, and he was speaking, hey, I might have to hold out. It's not what I want to do. That's not in my character. People who know me know I'm not like that. And I think that was just a, hey, we care about you type thing. We need you in camp as a leader here. And they got him in camp.
You mentioned it earlier, and you're right. Wide receivers are going to be next because you'll just draft them. I think when the wide receivers started getting traded, the year that Terry got his big deal, I think people started realizing then, and that's why you see, wide receivers, look how many go in the first and the second round every year. There's a reason for that. It's because they're not going to get paid in the future. They definitely are going to have to figure out some kind of new system by which each position gets paid, and whether it's separate pools that way. Because you're at what point when you get to quarterbacks that are getting $50 million a year, like they're going to have to separate them somehow. I'm not exactly sure how we get to that, but I think we're getting to a point where we've got to do those things.
Yeah, 100%.
If the AFC West is the best division in football, what's the worst division in football this year, Beard?
You know it. Come on.
Worst division in football.
South.
NFC South?
Feels like it.
Yeah, but listen.
The NFC West is not good this year.
Yeah, listen, the NFC West, we kind of looked at that division as one of the better divisions. It felt like, what was that, 3 years ago when it was like, Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, the Stafford and the Rams, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals were on the up and up, and then it was just like all that division came crashing down. So that's going to be an interesting division to look at. San Francisco's putting a lot of marbles on Brock Purdy here. So we better hope that is something that wasn't just a flash in the pan, and that he can do that for a 17-game season. But the NFC South, it seems like the logical choice. You have it's a new quarterback for every team. You have Bryce Young in Carolina, and then you have Derek Carr in New Orleans, and then Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay, and then what's the last team in that division that I'm forgetting?
Ritter comes back. I guess
Ritter comes back.
Ritter played 4 games last year.
He played 4 games last year, and I think there's potential there, but like if you had to put them up against the other divisions, I think they're probably the worst division. I think the Saints could be a sleeper team. I think the Falcons, if the Falcons could find a way to play defense, that team can be a 500 team in my opinion. I think the AFC South is going to be a little interesting, especially if the Colts end up getting rid of Jonathan Taylor.
Which I don't think, real quickly, I don't think is going to happen. I don't think they'll get anywhere close to what it takes to move him. Could you possibly even get a 4th for Jonathan Taylor right now, knowing you got to pay him? I don't see how.
Yeah.
Authentic and I went through some list of some teams that maybe, would be a potential landing home for him. I did read maybe like a couple of hours ago that the Dolphins made a significant offer for him, but they couldn't come to an agreement, the Dolphins and the Colts. So didn't they offer like a 2nd and a 4th, and the Colts said no? Was it something like that? If I was the Colts, I'm taking that 2nd and 4th, and I'm running.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because it just makes you're not going to be able to get a first round pick. Nobody's using a first round pick on running backs anymore. Anyways, these days it feels like unless you're the Detroit and Atlanta, which were both kind of head scratchers to me with this past draft as far as the place in which they took running backs. But it'll be interesting. I think the AFC South though is. I mean, Jacksonville should run away with that division. I mean, Tennessee is always Tennessee. You can't necessarily always count them out. But I mean, the Texans, are they going to be any different than they have been in the previous years? I've been betting on the Texans to win their over win total for feels like 5 years, and they haven't done it. So we'll see. But if I was forced to choose, I think I would go NFC South right now.
You mentioned Jacksonville. Getting Calvin Ridley is going to be a big deal. I think people
Facts.
forget how productive and the kind of separation he can get. Going to be huge for Lawrence.
Yeah.
Lawrence is a better quarterback than Herbert. Who do you prefer?
I go Herbert.
I'm Herbert right now, but Lawrence is fresh on the tails. This is a big year for Trevor Lawrence, I think. I feel like that jump that he made from his first year to last year, it didn't happen right overnight. I think we have to remember that, and I'm a little guilty of that myself. That it was the middle to the back end of last year where Trevor Lawrence really turned things up. But I think a lot of that's going to be credited to the coaching job of Doug Peterson over there. I think that difference between Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson is night and day. But yeah, I'm a big believer in Trevor Lawrence. I think he's creeping, knocking in that door of. He's a top 10 quarterback, obviously, to me right now. I think he's creeping up on that door of the top 5 guys out there. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Justin Herbert now, obviously, with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, it'll be interesting to see how that the relinquishment of duties between Staley and Moore go, and how Justin Herbert performs.
Joe Lombardi, Joe Lombardi has the worst scheme in the NFL. Like, I'm so surprised they didn't fire him mid-season. A lot of people who watch the Chargers don't understand the scheme that they're running over there. Herbert had his depth of target from his leading wide receiver was -1 yard. Like, they're literally throwing comebacks and checkdowns the whole entire time Mike Lombardi was over there. And we know what kind of quarterback Justin Herbert is. You got to stretch the field with that kind of quarterback.
Especially with Mike Williams.
Yeah, and you could say, the injury with Rashawn Slater last year was part of why they went to a more short passing scheme. But I just think Joe Lombardi is there's a reason why he's gone now. And I think that's why Staley was able to keep his job, because they were able to deflect it on the offensive coordinator rather than deflect it on the head coach, which is kind of what was happening with New York when we had Jason Garrett and Joe Judge. They're like, let's fire Jason Garrett first. Maybe it'll save the coach's job. And fortunately for Giants fans, it didn't save Joe Judge's job. But I think Staley, when you look at what Staley was doing when he was with the Rams defensively and when he had his personnel, he was fantastic. They looked at him as one of the best defensive minds in football at the time. He goes over to the Chargers. I always want to say San Diego. Like, to this day, I always want to say San Diego. But he goes over to the Chargers, and they just don't have the personnel to run it. He's tried to bring in people. They do a lot of 3 guys up front playing multiple gaps, and if you don't got the right guys to do that, you're not going to be able to play that kind of scheme. So defensively, they're taking a step back. But I think this year is going to be the year where we're going to figure out who Justin Herbert really is, and you're also going to figure out who Brandon Staley is as well.
I have been reading that things have not been going good early on in Denver camp. Bad things coming out about Wilson. Is it possible that he just fell off the cliff that fast, or do you think something else is going on?
I think Russ. I'm going to put a
And
lot
are you
of
a
that
Sean
on.
Payton believer? Is Sean Payton overhyped?
I'm not a Sean Payton like he's God like some people are. I think Sean Payton is a great. He's a good to great head coach. Once again, this will be interesting to see, because all we know of Sean Payton, he was in Dallas, doing a thing or whatever. But like, all we know really, Sean Payton is Drew Brees, right?
That's right.
So Drew Brees is a Hall of Fame quarterback. Russell Wilson.
Got to think about why, though. Got to think about why. It's a lot of that why is Sean Payton.
But I mean, like, it's almost like the Belichick Brady sort of situation, right? How some people say is Belichick without Brady, is Brady without Belichick. I guess it's kind of a coin flip. It's hard for me to. We had this conversation on walking to the game on Monday night. It kind of about like Matt Ryan, right? Like, it's hard for me to see these quarterbacks just fall off of a cliff
Right.
without like a major sort of injury. And I
And
mean,
yeah,
Russell Wilson had the injury with the hand or whatever, but I mean, last year just was a debacle. That was just horrible. Denver was it was mind blowing because they have the talent, they have the weapons. I mean, now they lost Jerry Judy today to a hamstring injury, which it looks like he's going to be missing some significant time. They
Yeah.
already lost KJ Hamler's not there right now. Neither is Tim Patrick.
Tim Patrick, yeah.
I mean, what they get down to what? Cortland Sutton, and I don't know what else is they're gonna do. So Russell Wilson's gonna have to figure something out. I think they're gonna run the ball a lot more this year, though. I'm a big Javonte Williams guy. I love him, and they added some depth to that running back room as well. So I don't think Russell Wilson is done, but the pressure's on. I know we always talk about let Russ cook, but I mean that pressure cooker is he's inside of it now. So he's not doing the outside cooking. He's cooking himself.
For me, I don't think Russell has fallen off a cliff. It's a lot of it is scheme based, but I think he came into last season out of shape. I don't know if y'all noticed it. He looked a little fat.
Yeah.
He looked a little round. I don't know if you did this on purpose by talking about Sean Payton and taking it from the Chargers, but Joe Lombardi's scheme is derivative of Sean Payton. And the reason why those schemes tend to work well is when you have a shorter quarterback who can't throw over the middle, they find ways to get the ball outside the hash with short passing concepts. I just think Joe Lombardi's wrinkles in that system aren't quite right. But Sean Payton is the perfect quarterback to get Russell Wilson back on track. If you look at some of the tape from Russell Wilson last year, he's missing reads right across the middle, check down reads right across the middle for touchdowns that he's just missing the receiver. And I think his mobility took a hit because he was a little bit out of shape. If you look at some of the workout videos that he's in so far this season, when he was doing his little ice skating thing and whatnot, going side to side. I don't know if y'all saw that one
yet.
but he definitely looks like he's in better shape. So a guy like Russell Wilson, he needs the mobility. He's also a guy that likes to attack down the field, so you got to be able to get those one-on-one matchups. Sean Payton is a mastermind. I don't even think we could just call Sean Payton a good coach. He's a great coach. He's proven it throughout his tenure. And for me, it's good to see him back in football. I got to see him a little bit on Colin Cowherd's show every now and again as a featured guest. And I always thought that those were some of Colin's best shows. It's like you really got a football guy up here really talking X's and O's, and we know Sean Payton knows that. So I don't know if Russell Wilson will get back into that like top 5 category that he was in, I'd say maybe 2 years ago. But even the injured year with Seattle, Russell Wilson still put up some good numbers. I believe it was single-digit interceptions and double-digit in the 20 range of touchdowns. So I think he'll get back on track, just probably not into that top 5. I think he'll regain his spot in the top 10, though.
What are the Cardinals supposed to do with Kyler Murray now? Like, do you blow the whole thing up, assuming you're going to get the first round draft pick? Do you sell the first round draft pick and provide as much as you can for Kyler Murray? They gave him the big contract not that long ago, so it's probably not an easy thing to move. Like, seriously, what are the Arizona Cardinals supposed to do with Kyler Murray and the future of the program with a head coach that I don't hear very many good things about?
It's going to be tough to part ways with Kyler. I thought a good trade for them would be San Francisco. I know it's within division. I think that Kyler Murray would be a great fit with San Fran, but you can't just like cut him. The dead cap is going to be ridiculous. The contract is too large. They're in a similar position to what the Chicago Bears were in this year entering the draft, and you saw what they did. They know they got their quarterback over there in Justin Fields, and they said, screw it. We're just going to deal this first-round pick for as much as we can get and try to build around the kid. And they look like they're going to go from a team that was where or last season the Chicago Bears were where the Cardinals are this year. Everybody's looking at them like, you got nothing on this roster.
Quickly,
Right.
the difference I think is they like Fields as the person and the player, and I'm not sure that the Cardinals are in love with Murray the person anymore.
That's true, and I do think a lot of that might have had to do with Cliff Kingsbury, and they fired him. So a new coach comes in, he's going to want his guy, or he has to at least agree that that's going to be the guy. I just think they're in a tight squeeze here as far as that contract goes if you can't find a trade partner. And Kyler Murray's the kind of guy that talent is not the issue. So, he's still a young quarterback. If you got to mold the personality issues and you got to mold the dedication to the playbook and, being a leader on that team, I think you can mold him into that. When you look at Justin Fields' rookie season, it was god-awful. I like to do this thing where I look at all snaps from quarterbacks. And lately it's been Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts, right? I've looked at every snap from Justin Fields. It's almost like you're looking at a different player in the rookie season. His escapability from within the pocket, this guy was getting tackled in the pocket every damn time. And now it's almost like if you see an edge rusher get to the outside, Justin Fields is going to burn you right up the middle. And he's learning on the job and becoming a better quarterback. I honestly think that Justin Fields is going to make a leap into the top 10 this year. Now, Kyler Murray already showed that he can do all that stuff. You go back to Kyler Murray's rookie season, he was the offensive rookie of the year. The second year, he put up fantastic numbers. I believe he had over 800 rushing yards, and all that happened before D-Hop got there. Now, D-Hop gets there. We know how that can be. I was one who was clamoring to try to bring D-Hop here to New York for Daniel Jones. I love that kind of alpha wide receiver one, especially when we had already acquired Darren Waller. But sometimes what an alpha wide receiver can do is put pressure on your quarterback to get him the ball so much, and things aren't being spread out evenly. There's not an even distribution from the quarterback. And the timing of this injury for Kyler Murray, it's the most untimely it could possibly be, because I don't think they would have dealt D-Hop and just let him go to Tennessee if Kyler Murray was coming into this year healthy. You could have tried to compete at least a little bit, but now their chances of competing are pretty much out the window with Kyler Murray not there. So I think they're in a tough pickle here. They're going to have to find a way. I'd commit to the quarterback. I think Kyler Murray's a special talent, and you just got to get the right coach around him. And if you brought in a coach and that coach seems like he can't utilize Kyler Murray to his best skill set and his best benefit, then I don't know if that's the right coach for the team.
I mean, think about it like this: if they do somehow manage to move off from Kyler Murray, it'd be like it's just like the whole Josh Rosen thing, and then Kyler Murray, and then now we're giving Kyler Murray the bag, and it's like, okay, well, we're gonna get rid of everybody, and we're gonna go get Caleb Williams from USC, right? So it's like, can you really do that? Is that the way that you want to run a
And
franchise?
lose a ton of money. A
But
ton
it
of money. And then what
feels
if
it
Caleb
feels
Williams
like
is like, hey, I want to pull a Eli Manning. I ain't playing for y'all.
it feels like they're offloading everything possible right now. Like, there's been some fire sales in the NFL, but right now it feels like they are legitimately like, hey, you guys want somebody? Just I mean, we'll take a 7th round for Isaiah Simmons. Sure,
Yep.
why not? You know, here you go.
The
And
ninth
nowadays
overall.
in the NFL, we saw Carolina do that last year, and they're turning this thing around. They did a fire sale last year and still managed to win games, and down
They
to the last
almost
2
made
weeks
the
of the
they almost
season,
won a division.
they're about to go winning that division wouldn't. That's like,
Yeah,
I don't
true.
want to go there. I don't want to go there. Y'all know where I was about to go, but I'm not gonna go there. But they were competing and they were playing some good football, and then now they off DJ Moore and they do all this, and they're still now in position to at least like compete within that division with a new quarterback. I'm not expecting them to be some great team, but they should be in the mix within the next couple of years here. And I think modern NFL, you're able to turn that over faster. I mean, I'm speaking from a Giants fan perspective where for 5 years we were the worst team in football with the New York Jets. And now you take that roster, just like Doug said in the beginning of the show, and you bring in the right coach, and now that same roster can win some games for you. That same roster with less pieces, because we had Kadarius Toney, Kenny Galladay, some other guys we thought would be contributors, right? Brian Dable looked at these guys and was like, y'all got to prove to me that y'all got to be out on the field. Dealt Kadarius Toney, sat Kenny Galladay on the bench all damn year up until the last game of the season. And he brought up guys from practice squads and free agency, brought in guys like Isaiah Hodgins, guys who came in and were immediate impacts for us, and even utilizing guys like Richie James, who no one was even looking at a Richie James, and now he's got a small little contract over there in Kansas City and has a chance to compete for a job over there. So I think it's all about the coaching. It all starts from the coaching. When you look at the Cardinals, can you really say the quarterback is the problem? Probably not.
Yeah, very true. Is Galladay on a roster?
Not right now.
We'll get to that in a second. Before we wrap up with the division, I was curious you guys' thoughts on this. If the Rams, let's say, let's assume that Arizona wasn't the worst team in the league, and so thereby the Rams would be the worst in that division, let's say for a couple of years, will it have been worth it to win the Super Bowl? I mean, how much losing are you willing to take, knowing that you did it all for the Super Bowl? And they did. They put it all out there for the Super Bowl and got it. It never actually works that way, right? But put all their eggs in the basket and they won. As a fan base, how would you feel about that?
I love this topic. This is one of my favorite topics, to be honest, because Sean McVay, he's a damn mastermind, okay? So he's trading away first-round picks every year. They've never had a first-round pick since McVay has been there, right? That leads people to assume that team is not homegrown. Entering the year of that Super Bowl, they were one of 6 teams that over 60% of their roster was homegrown because they're doing a fantastic job drafting in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th round in the middle rounds of the draft, right? And then when it was time, when they were like, hey, we're right there. We just need to get over the hump. They went out there, they brought in an edge rusher. They brought in Odell Beckham. They spent the chips and they did what they had to do. I'm not as low as most people are on the Rams this year. And the Rams are on our schedule this year. I don't know if they're on y'all's schedule, but they're on our schedule this year. We get to play them. And everybody's looking at the Rams like, oh, Giants are just going to walk right over them. can't forget Cooper Kupp was injured last year. And before that, we're looking at a Triple Crown winner. We're looking at a guy who was the first person to do this since like Jerry Rice, right? So he's their main weapon. Imagine if you take the main weapon away from any team, what that can do to that team. We've seen it with Saquon Barkley, where the Giants will be a team who's competing in games, and you take away Saquon Barkley, and we're absolute trash. Same thing happened with Daniel Jones the year we brought in Mike Glennon at quarterback with Jake Fromm, who's now on y'all roster, and we could not get past the 50-yard line with these guys on the field. So I'm looking at the Rams this year. I don't think they're going to be in that ballpark of the two worst teams in the NFL. The odds that the two worst teams are going to be in the same division, can't forget they got to play each other too twice this year, right? So I think the Rams are going to be a maybe. I'm going to say the floor for the Rams is 6 wins this year. It's not going to surprise me if they're a team that's right around 500 and competing late in that year. They've got the quarterback, they got the wide receiver weapon, and their defense has lost a couple of weapons, but they still got great pass rushers up front. And I think they'll be able to keep themselves in games. I got to look at their schedule verbatim to see game by game how it's looking, because when you look at like our schedule, Dallas Cowboys schedule, Washington schedule, it's like, damn, there's some really tough games on there. And I don't know if they're going to be facing those teams. So I would have to look at the schedule, but I'm intrigued by it. I think it's 100% worth it when you win the Super Bowl. It's 100% worth it. And you still got a aging quarterback over there. But Matthew Stafford, barring the injury being something that will set him back for the rest of his career, he should be able to go out there and win some games for at least another year or two.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's franchises that have not won Super Bowls. There's players who have never been to a Super Bowl. Like, I think people are just they don't realize how tough it is to win it all sometimes. They don't realize how difficult it is to make it to a Super Bowl, yet alone win a Super Bowl. So I think as a fan base, you're like always like, playoffs or bust, Super Bowl or bust. But like, there's only a few teams that have won a Super Bowl in the past, 10 to 20 years. It's not, so it's very, very difficult. So yes, I'm all for it. And I think, when people talk about the draft stuff, the point that Authentic brought up about the homegrown talent and drafting in the mid to late rounds, like, it's almost like people just want, when they want to talk about McVay and trading all the draft picks away, they don't want to allow that information into the conversation, So it's like, it's easily forgotten to the normal person who doesn't, have that information.
And he doesn't cling on to those picks or those players either. That's what I love about it. It's like you get Brandon Cooks over there. They're like, we're cool with dealing him. Tavon Austin, we're cool with dealing him. So many players went through that system.
Jalen Ramsey.
Robert Woods, Ramsey. They're just like, go. Because they're trying to get to the big game. And that's all fans and all coaches and all players, that's what we want. We want to win a Super Bowl.
Well,
when
you're paying the quarterback good money, remember, you can't afford to pay, a whole bunch of first-round picks at some point.
Yeah, but right? I love their young talent. I've been high. I'm really high on Cam Akers. I'm a Cam Akers guy. I'm probably higher than most. I like Van Jefferson. I think Tutu Atwell showed some flashes last year as well. I think Higbee is a very underrated tight end in the National Football League. So I think they have the potential. If you put those sort of players with McVay and a healthy Matthew Stafford, I think there's a recipe there for a non-stagnant offense, if that makes any sense.
It's funny when you say all the names out loud, it's like we're talking about a team that people are expecting to win 4 games. When you say all the names out loud, it's like, wait, they have the coach, they have the quarterback, they have the weapon, they got the tight end, right? They got a decent, at least capable running back over there. They got defensive players over there who can make plays. Like, why are we all just set on like they're going to be this garbage team? That I'm always like this. You got to take that outlier season and just remove it until you get another one. That's how I look at it. Mm-hmm. So if they come back this year and you see, 5, 6 wins, all right, then I'm going to start being like, hey, man, Matthew Stafford's kind of falling off. McVay going to have to, revamp this a little bit.
The guy that they got Stafford to replace a guy who I thought was pretty good in Jared Goff. I like him and the weapons that they've got in Detroit. Were you surprised though that they didn't upgrade? They were in kind of that range to get Anthony Richardson. They could have done something there to upgrade the position. I thought it was smart not to upgrade the position. Again, I think I'm higher than most on Goff, always have been. Beard, I'm curious, how do you where are you on the lines within that division, and kind of where you are with Goff and him leading the show there? Is he good enough?
Well, look, you're looking at 2 guys who love to play 18 holes. We're some golfers. We're some golfers right here. Okay, so yeah. I mean, both I'll let Authentic, speak for himself, but I mean, we're pretty high on Goff as a player. We recently, talked about our top 10 quarterbacks, and I had him as an honorable mention, hovering around that number 10 slot. I think he's easily could be argued for being the number 10 quarterback in the National Football League in my rankings. I'm a big Dan Campbell guy. I think I love that head coach, like his style of head coach. I was a little thrown off by them not going defense. So like for me, I had drafting quarterback for the Detroit Lions never even crossed my mind as when it came to draft day. I thought that they were gonna try and go more defense. They moved around a lot. The Jahmyr Gibbs thing was a little surprising to me. Personally, I nothing
If he's
against
going to run
Gibbs.
8 routes a game, then it's not surprising.
Yeah,
Right.
I think
Right.
like it's nothing against Gibbs. I think Gibbs is a super talented guy. It's just I felt that they were so bad defensively at times last year, and then they already let Okuda go, and so like it just and he had finally started to play well towards the back end of last year, and so like for me it was just I don't know. It was weird to go that way. They did get Hooker, which I think is kind of like they didn't spend a lot of capital on him. They got him late in the draft. He's a guy that was coming off an injury. He won't even be active for the first 4 games of the season. So I think that was kind of like their back end, Sam Howell sort of Hail Mary as far as the quarterback position goes. Like if it works out like how we're hoping it works out here in Washington, then that ends up being a steal of a pick in the draft. You don't really have a project guy. You just have a guy that, is a little bit older and coming off of an injury. So that's interesting to me. I'm a little worried though about the Detroit Lions wide receiver depth. I think
Yeah.
that's something that kind of worries me a little bit, but and the tight end position too. I think is they drafted the guy out of Iowa, I believe. Um,
Laporta.
yeah, so I think that there's some potential there, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see what their identity is because I think we looked at that team as a high scoring, high flying offense. They're gonna miss Jameson for is it 6 games? Six
I think
games he's
6.
out. That's a hefty. That's a
Yeah.
third of your schedule there, basically. So it's gonna be the Sun God. Amon-Ra St. Brown is gonna put up insane numbers for the first 6 weeks of the season, I think. But I have to really dive into their schedule to see kind of where I feel as far as they go. I think they can win that division. I'm higher on the Packers than most people are. I'm lower on the Vikings. I think most people are, and I think the Bears are a wild card. That division is going to be fun. I think it's going to
Yep.
be
I
fun.
think
I
it will
think
be
they're gonna
fun.
they're gonna beat up on each other a lot. I think, and let's say it this way: there's not in many divisions in football that you could sit there and say that you could potentially see any of those teams winning the division. Now, I probably am a little bit off on that. I'm sure there's a lot of people
Nah.
that don't think Chicago or Green Bay can win that division as much as I do, but I think anybody can win that division.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Jared Goff. There's a ceiling there, and it's similar to a Ryan Tannehill to me a little bit, like where these guys can definitely do most things that good quarterbacks can do in this league. But Goff, my thing is like when you look at his wide receiver core, a lot of people look at the offensive talent around him and they think there's like great talent in Detroit. Dating back to last season, their second wide receiver was a guy that was cut from the Giants. His name's Khalif Raymond, and he was their second wide receiver as far as yardage goes. So I think he was dealing with scraps. I think he gets a bad rap too. It's similar to Dak Prescott. When you just like envision the Dallas Cowboys, you think weapons, weapons. Oh my God, Dak Prescott has everything around him, right? But let's just keep it funky. I mean, CeeDee Lamb, and then what? Noah Brown, a banged up Michael Gallup. Are we really saying that's like a really great core? Because like if I'm a fan of the Dallas Cowboys and you tell me that's my core, I'm not that excited. So bringing in Brandon Cooks helps them out. I think the reason why the Detroit Lions didn't go, more wide receiver depth is because they thought Jameson Williams was going to be there this year. And, you end up getting this little suspension. It's definitely going to be a little bit of a setback. But I think they already know how to operate without him. So they should be good. You can't get off to a terrible start like you did the season before. I think they started off 1-6 last year, and then they made a run on the back half of the season
Yeah.
and started to put themselves in playoff contention all the way up until the last week until they were eliminated. So Goff is a really good quarterback. The floor is high. The ceiling is not that high. So, I don't think they should have went out there and drafted a quarterback in this draft because if you're not getting one of the top 2 guys, I don't think it would be a good idea to bring in a project like Anthony Richardson, who would take a little bit longer to develop, even though he's my favorite quarterback from this past draft class. I think he's better suited in a situation where you could let him kind of just play his lumps and kind of get his feet wet on the field and make some mistakes. Whereas Detroit is kind of in position, like the Beard just said, to win that division. And I don't think it's crazy to think that any one of those teams is going to win the division. Minnesota Vikings already showed you what they can do. They got the best wide receiver in the league. Kirk Cousins is more than capable quarterback. Put up 4,000 yards pretty much every year he's been in this league. And then when you look at the Chicago Bears and all the upgrades they made around Justin Fields, spending draft capital on the offensive line, they brought in Nate Davis to play right guard for them. Bringing in DJ Moore, a true number one wide receiver over there. They got Khalil Herbert at running back. They added all these pieces on the defense. Edmonds, Edwards, they're stacking up right now. They brought in not Jadeveon Clowney. That was the Ravens. They brought in one more player though. I can't remember who the one more player was. They just brought in somebody else. But they're stacking the pieces up and they're going for theirs right now. I look for the Bears to be at least a 7-8 win team this year, and if they win the division, not going to surprise me.
All right, let's wrap it up like this back in the division. Authentic. What makes for a good Giants season, and what do they have to do to get there?
I think number one is going to start with the quarterback here. You invested weapons. You brought in Darren
Well,
Waller.
I'm high on that. Not to cut you off, but I've always been a Daniel Jones fan too. I think he's in.
Yeah, I've wavered a bit. Coming into the league, Daniel Jones preseason was absolutely ridiculous that rookie year. He was like 80% in the preseason. He looked like he just couldn't miss. And then when he had his debut against the Bucs, I was like, holy, we definitely got a franchise quarterback here. The Jason Garrett, Joe Judge eras, my confidence and my faith was definitely tested during those years. You got a quarterback who's coming in and putting up 12 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns in a whole season. Then he's getting hurt for a few games. So I definitely question, and the turnovers the rookie year was definitely something to be alarming. 19 fumbles, you lose 11 of those, and 6 of those were scooped up and scored for a touchdown for the other team. So it goes to show you how bad our left tackle play was and how, Daniel Jones' pocket presence just wasn't there. You get Brian Dable in here, simplifies things. Daniel Jones is starting to look like a much better quarterback. They're utilizing his legs. I've looked at a ton of tape, like I told you about looking at every snap from quarterbacks. I've obviously looked at every snap from my own quarterback, and Daniel Jones is more than capable. It's just all about making things in front of him easier for him to read. Don't give him these extensive type of concepts that have you reading 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and wasting time in the pocket. Brian Dable came in here and said, hey, Daniel Jones, if your second read not there, man, take off and run it. And in return, he had over 700 rushing yards. He had over 110 carries this year. So Daniel Jones, I think he's a good example of what the modern day quarterback can be. The question mark here is what is his ceiling, right? Can Daniel Jones be elite? That's the question that I have for myself. Being above average or being good or being a game manager with legs, we know Daniel Jones can do those things. They brought in Waller. They brought in Paris Campbell. We've got some offensive line help here. We're hoping that Evan Neal can, we can see the maturation of him in his second season and have a bookend tackle on the right side as well with Andrew Thomas on the left. You brought in JMS at the center position, so this line should start to solidify up here, and he has the weapons. I want to see this offense open up a little bit. A lot of Giants fans don't like when you talk about it when it comes to Daniel Jones, but 15 touchdowns, when you play a full season in the NFL, I don't care who's out there, wide receiver, that cannot be a thing that continuously happens. So I'm looking to see this offense open up. He was last in the league as far as average depth of target last year, yards per attempt. I want to see these things go up. They don't have to go up crazy, and I've been having these talks with a lot of my Giants homies lately where, an example of it is, and a lot of people don't like to use Patrick Mahomes as an example, but in this example, I think it's a really good one to use. 31 touchdowns Patrick Mahomes had that were 10 yards or less. So that goes to show you that they're not stretching the field like they once were because a lot of defenses are playing too high. So I want to see Daniel Jones mix it up with the intermediate stuff. We know he's got a great deep ball. He can do that. So for me, it's not necessarily a win total. I want to see the Giants get back to the playoffs. I think that's kind of important to, keep to keep stacking the chips a bit. And, if it's 9 wins, 8 wins and a tie, whatever it may be, I just want to get in. I want to see improved football. Defensively, I just want to see health. That's so important this year. A lot of people overlooked that last year the Giants lost their 2 best players in the secondary for a good chunk of the season. Adoree Jackson was out after he got hurt on the punt return, and then Xavier McKinney was out after he flipped his ATV in Cabo and broke his hand. So you get those 2 guys back. They're going to be there for the whole year. You just added Isaiah Simmons, who's a guy who can play anywhere. Secondary, linebacker. This guy can rush the quarterback. He can do catback type stuff. He can play money backer. He can play, in the box. He can do it all. So it's all about tapping into that talent. And I think he got with the perfect defensive coordinator in Wink Martindale, who knows how to do things with those kind of players. You look at the Giants defense last year, there were so many times where we only had one linebacker on the field. the entire year, and it was Smith, who was ex-Dallas Cowboy, who was doing a lot of that. Jalen Smith, who's
Doing it
not that
again.
great in pass coverage, So we're looking for guys that can come out here. We scooped up Bobby O. He's a guy who has better pass coverage as well and can stop the run. The Giants were terrible at stopping the run last year, so we got to improve in those departments. And I think it'll be a really good season. I'm expecting really good from the New York Giants this year, and then they can go out there and find themselves that alpha number one wide receiver during this Darren Waller tenure, and you have those two guys on the field and possibly still have a Saquon Barkley. The following year is when I think you should see some greatness.
If they don't get to where you think they can get to this year, why?
Offensive line is going to be the number one reason. You need Evan Neal to take that step up. Last year, right tackle was one of our biggest issues up front. And interior-wise, we weren't that great. And we got rid of one of our guys I thought was one of the people we should have kept around, and y'all scooped him up, which is Nick Gates. Just tough, tenacity. He's just feisty. He'll fight anybody. He'll represent for his quarterback. We saw it live and in the flesh at the preseason game. He's the kind of guy that's going to stand up for his teammates. I'm not sure why they parted ways with him, but interior-wise, I do think the line could be an issue. And the whole thing about stretching the field with Daniel Jones, it starts up front. It starts in the trenches. You got to be able to get this kid some time to throw the ball down the field. And now with bringing in Jalen Hyatt as a rookie to pair with a guy like Darius Slayton, we got the guys and we got the speed to be able to stretch the field. So I don't see no reason why it shouldn't happen.
And Beer will end with you. It's 6.5 wins for the win total for Washington. I'm assuming you're smashing that. What do you expect out of the Skins this year, and how do we get there?
It's tough. Last year, preseason, I said every single team in the NFC East was going to have a winning record. I almost got there. Washington finished 8-1. It's so the schedule. I hate to beat on the schedule. I really do, because you don't know until the games are played, right? Like what might have been a tough game, before the season starts, ends up not being a tough game, and vice versa. One of the games you thought might have been an easy game turns out to be a lot tougher than when you initially looked at the schedule before the season started. For me, I think it's just about it's finally tapping into all the potential. For the Washington Commanders, you've heard so much about the potential. This defense could this. This offensive weapons can be this. But it's just a matter of it actually coming to life, I think. And I think you're going to see a lot of that with the change in schemes from Scott Turner to Eric Bieniemy. I talked about it in the beginning of the show, and I'll probably – it'll be in my mouth for the remainder of the season. I'm really think that this sort of offense is what's going to tap into the potential of these playmakers. And I think a lot of the similarities, though, are going to be there with, the New York Giants. My main concern is going to be the offensive line. I think the linebackers are a concern to me. Our run defense is a concern to me. But I think that if the defensive line and the secondary live up to their potential, we finally tap into that potential. Chase Young comes back and he plays like, he was supposed to, and what I thought he looked like at times and early on in his career. And then Montez Sweat continues to progress and be one of the more underrated, defensive players in the National Football League. I think that, you can look at this team, this roster, and not look at the schedule and say this team can win 11 games. Will they win 11 games? I don't know. We don't know. There's too many unknowns for me. Like I love Sam Howell as a quarterback, and I think he looks tremendous so far. But he's only played one game in the National Football League. So, we don't know how it's really going to translate until the games are played. But I think if you have a winning record, okay, and Sam Howell plays well, and Chase Young plays well, and you don't get blown out, I think you look at the season as a success, in my opinion, because I think that, the winning is what matters the most. Feeling comfortable and confident that you finally found a quarterback. Like if Sam Howell goes out there and he's at a 2-1, 3-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and a lot of it just falls on the heels of the mistakes and stuff like that and the sacks because of the offensive line, and the defense plays well and you're competitive. I think that's a success, because I feel like we haven't had those three things for a complete season in a long time. So for me, that's what I'm looking at is a complete package. Good quarterback play, the defense living up to the hype and the potential, and being competitive. I feel like that's the most important thing, because say the schedule ends up being as tough as it looks, and you're in those games, and you lose one score games or 10-point games to teams that make it far into the playoffs. You look back on the season as somewhat of a success, coming from where we have been over the last 20 years. But this team, I think, floor is probably going to be it's going to be 6 wins, I'd say. And I think the ceiling is probably 11 wins. I haven't made my prediction yet for the season, but I think the floor is 6 and the ceiling is probably 11.
Yeah, it's tough. The more and more I look at that schedule, it really feels like getting to 9, like finding the 9 wins has been tough for me. Like, I'd really like to just say we won 8 games last year. And like I said, we didn't score
Yeah.
very many points. And the defense, even if it gets worse on third down, they got no turnovers. So if they get more turnovers this year, like the defense should still be around the same. But man, you look at that schedule and they cannot afford, put it like this, Beard, they cannot not afford to get off to the typical Ron Rivera start.
That's one of the
Yeah.
things Authentic and I talked about the other day. I was
Yeah.
like, man, if we could get out of the gate at like 2-2,
Y'all need that 2-0, man. I'm telling you, like,
Yeah.
if Washington starts off 2-0, I forget the week 3 matchup. I think it's the
Buffalo, right?
Oh, it's Buffalo, then the Eagles. Yep, Eagles are week 4. If you get off to a 2-0 start, there's a good shot you can win one of those games. We've already seen you guys beat Philly last year. So I think that's a game, it's a matchup that you guys match up very well with them. Run the ball, keep Jalen Hurts on the sideline. And Buffalo's beatable. We saw Zach Wilson and the Jets beat Buffalo. So I think for Washington, you got to get that confidence early on. Get to that 2-0. It's what the Giants did last year. We kind of fell apart on the back half of the season, only had 2 wins in our last 10 games, and then the tie against you guys. You guys get off to that good start, who knows? You might mess around, beat Buffalo, get the 3-0, and that'll be what could spark you guys into that ceiling type of record that y'all are looking for.
And don't get me excited, Authentic. All right, so tell everybody what the show schedule looks like during the season.
We're still kind of ironing it out, but it's probably going to be similar to what we had last year. We're going to be dropping some more pre-recorded videos this year, but Mondays I do a show called The Giant Overreaction, where I kind of just like take national media stuff, take Twitter tweets and stuff like that people are saying, and my our family in the chat and whatnot will react to that, and we kind of say, are you going to take the over or the under on what that person says? That's our Monday show. Tuesdays, we do our preview shows for the games coming up that week.
Recap.
I'm sorry,
recap.
Tuesdays, we do our recap shows for the games from the past week. Then Thursdays, we do our preview shows. And Saturday or Sunday morning, we do the parlay. So we're 4 days a week, man. We're very active. It's just Authentic the way I spell it here. The Beard has it on his, Authentic and the Beard on YouTube. And I think we're going to double up on the amount of content that we're going to have this year. We're doing a lot of different things. And I'm trying to dive into a little bit of storytelling and documentaries as far as football goes, too. So look for some of that stuff on the channel as well.
Well, I'm excited about it. You two do some of the best work around. So keep it up. And I appreciate you coming on the show today. Almost an hour and a half. I did not even realize that. The time flew by. So I appreciate you guys.
It does.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you for having us on the show, bro.
All right, man.
All right, bro.